sweeping general statements about writing. I mean, there's so many writers who've broken the rule, every rule, and gotten away with it. For me, plotting things out is what made the difference. That's what allowed me to get through an entire story. There's some authors who find it better to write without a plan and to work out their characters as they write. Everyone's different. I know a lot of fantasy authors who use plots, or outlines, and that just helps. You know, part of it is that when you create an imaginary world, you have no guideposts, you have no map, you have no history, you have nothing that we have in the real world, and that's one reason why it is useful to do those things. Although one of the pitfalls you can fall into is that you come up with a whole history for your land, and then you feel like you have to put that information in. And so how many fantasy books have you seen that start with a prologue that's saying, you know, in the beginning, the gods created the land, and they go through a whole history of the land before the story actually starts. And again, that can work sometimes, but oftentimes it just ends up being unnecessary information. So my advice, I mean, what's worked for me is plot out your stories, read everything you can about that other writers have written about the process of writing. You know, whether or not they write fantasy or not, or whatever genre you're interested in. So find, you know, letters from Chekhov, find memoirs from this author, find this or that. Read everything you can. Write some more, and then when you're done, go back and write again. Really, that's the hardest thing, is sitting down every single day and making yourself write. I have trouble with it even. But unless you have that persistence every single day, you'll never get a book done. I even thought I wasn't going to get Brissinger done at times, or Aragon or Eldest, but it's only because I worked on it every single day that eventually I got 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 900 some pages. And as equally as important as all those things are, then you have to find someone to look at your work and tell you what you may have done wrong. Because, you know, you can't know something that you don't know. And if you're making mistakes without realizing it, then you need someone else to help you see those. And having someone edit your work, critique your work, is invaluable. On the other hand, you want to make sure the person critiquing your work isn't someone who really hates the genre you're working in, or something like that. So I was fortunate that both my parents have a pretty good understanding of what constitutes clear writing. So they were able to look at my early work and really help me develop a more professional writing style. And nowadays, of course, I don't have to worry so much about, you know, the grammar. It's more the larger issues now. Character, world building, motivation, that sort of thing. And that I work with primarily with my editor. But you need to find someone you can work with like that, whether it's your parents or a teacher or a fellow writer who maybe has a good eye for editing. I know it's a long answer to a short question, but if you really devote yourself to writing, if you really want to pursue it as a career, then it becomes your entire life. And you spend pretty much all of your time either writing, thinking about writing, talking about writing, reading about writing, or sleeping and dreaming about writing.
When you were writing Aragon, you weren't under any pressure, like you weren't being paid to do it. Is that a factor in your writing now?
Well, I'm qualifying that because actually I wasn't under pressure with the first draft of Eldest, with the first draft of Aragon, but subsequent drafts of Aragon, there was a lot of pressure with just questions of whether I was going to go to school, if we were going to self-publish, and the money required to self-publish. We were very tight for money at the time. It was a very intense time in my life, in our family's life. So there was a lot of pressure with Aragon, actually, and there was pressure with Eldest for the deadline. I ended up writing the last 75-some pages of Eldest in 13 days, longhand. My mom typed it into the computer. She was very, very nice about that. And with Brissinger, there was a deadline I definitely had to try to meet. I say try because the deadline sort of kept flying past. But I try not to think about it. I mean, I try to remember that the reason I started this was because I wanted to read books like this when I was 15, you know, when I was younger than you guys, well, most of you. And so that's what I try to remember when I'm writing, you know? I'm writing a story that I want to enjoy myself. And so I keep putting stuff in and saying, ooh, that's cool, that's cool. Or, you know, oh, this is interesting with the characters, let's take it in this direction. So if I start thinking about all the people who've read the books and the fact that there's a deadline and, you know, there's these expectations for the series, then I'm really not able to write as well as I need to.
One thing I struggle with when trying to write a book, and I have tried a couple times, is coming up with names for people. Where do you get the ideas for names? I mean, there's so many names in your books.
Well, I started with mythology. You know, go to, you know, whatever mythology appeals to you. You know, go back to the old names. Start, you know, modify them. I mean, one of the tricks is, for example, Nordic mythology has been used so much by fantasy authors at this point. It's kind of hard to, especially me, I've kind of used up a lot of the names as well. It's hard to find names that haven't actually been used. And that's not to say you can't reuse them. For example, the King of the Dwarves, Hrothgar. I mean, that's from Beowulf. I love that name, Hrothgar. And it's used in a lot of different places. So there are some names you can reuse, unless, of course, it's only been used in one other place and it's very, very distinctive. You should probably stay away from it. So what I do is I tend to look at mythology for sort of the guidelines to how to form the names. I will modify some of the names sometimes. And then once I got a feel for them, I started just creating them from scratch. The dwarf names, aside from Hrothgar and a few others, most of them are pretty much just from scratch. A few of them, a few are real. I have a dwarf named Flossie in Brissinger. A male dwarf, mind you, and that was a male Nordic name, Flossie, F-L-O-S-I, with an accent mark. Once I saw that, I said, oh, come on, I gotta have a dwarf named Flossie. The elf names tend to be, they're all invented. I mean, there's really nothing I can look at that sounds like the way I wanted the Elvish to sound, because even though I used Old Norse for the ancient language, I didn't want the names to sound really too Nordic.
Well, I've noticed with fantasy books, they kind of take the aspects of the different cultures and they apply them to the names. Like elves are usually graceful and really wise and quiet, so their names they don't have like K's or really hard sounds.
Exactly, and in fact, even if you look at Old Norse, you'll find very, very few names that start with C, almost none, and almost none that start with P for some reason. So yeah, actually, I think I have a few K's in some of my elf names. I mean, one reason I used Old Norse as the basis for the ancient language is I actually wanted a slightly harsher sound for my Elvish than is normally done. So I've got definitely some flowing words, but there definitely are also some sharper, rougher sounds in the ancient language. And of course, Dwarvish, it just sounds like you're gagging on a hairball. So, but I love Dwarvish. It's so much fun to pronounce.
Could you give us a sample?
Here, give me a copy of our eldest. Now, of course, I'm not an elf. So imagine it many times more graceful, and I can't roll my R's properly. So this is the song that Aragon hears when he comes into Elismira. Gala o weirde Brunhvitter, aber Berendal Wanderfodder, Berthrow Laufsbladder ecker under, Jom Kono Delfeliker. Or the greeting the elves do sometimes. Atra sterni ono Thelduin, Maraner Lifa unin harta onner, undu Everinia ono Varda. So it's got some rougher sounds in there, but still pretty flowing. And then the dwarves. This is what the dwarf is objecting to Aragon coming into the dwarf city of Tarnog, and he's saying, you know, this Shade Slayer, this Dragon Rider has no place in Tarnog, our holiest of cities. Do you forget the curse of our clan, the tears of Anowin, bears from the Dragon War? We will not let him pass, he is, etc., etc. Okay. See if I can remember how to do this. Form Hrothkarach! Form Jürgen Karmeter! Nos et a Goroth bas dar Tarnog! Doran Sesti Rakithan! Yak is war of Aj Barzuligur, dur Durgrimst as Schwelden Rak Anowin, Mog Tor Rak Jürgenvren. Ne undum etel as